I wasn't supposed to end up with someone like Claire Whitmore. She was the kind of woman you see on magazine covers without realizing she's not a model, just someone that rich, that poised, that powerful. I first saw her at a charity gala in Manhattan, surrounded by polished men in Italian suits and women with eyes that scanned you like stock prices. Claire stood out, even among them. She had presence, the kind that made silence form around her naturally, like the world understood it had to pause when she walked by. I was there as a plus one. My startup had just gotten a tiny grant from one of the smaller firms Claire's company had donated to, and a board member thought it'd be cute to bring along one of the little people. That little person was me, Nathan Pierce, Ohio born, state school educated, bootstrap tech guy in a Target blazer. I was still rehearsing my elevator pitch near the bar when Claire walked up and asked if I knew where the restroom was. She didn't need directions. That was just her way in. And somehow we talked for 20 straight minutes. Her questions were sharp but warm. Her laugh was deliberate but not fake. She made me feel like I belonged, even if every second with her reminded me that I didn't. She didn't ask for my last name until the end of our conversation. When I gave it, she smiled slightly, like she was saving it for later. We started dating quietly. At first, I thought it was a fling. Claire dated in her world, not mine. But our dinners became weekends, and weekends turned into holidays. The first time she visited my tiny studio apartment in Brooklyn, she looked around like she was in a museum exhibit, not disgusted, more amused, like she was taking in a different species. She didn't complain, didn't flinch when the hot water ran out, but she made a lot of soft suggestions. Maybe a real bed frame? Ever think of hiring a cleaner? To her, it was helping. To me, it felt like being slowly rebranded. Claire's world had rules I didn't know existed, like how you never wear black to certain charity luncheons, or how you order wine without looking at the price, or how you mention a designer's name casually as if it's just a natural part of life. I learned to play along. I started buying nicer shirts. I stopped flinching when the check came. I learned how to say no ice with my scotch, even though I hated the taste. And Claire, she leaned in like she was sculpting something, not maliciously, but with purpose. Still, she never pretended I was someone I wasn't. She liked my grit, my stubbornness. Once, when her father asked what I did for a living, Claire stepped in before I could say founder of a pre-revenue platform and said, he builds things from nothing. Isn't that more impressive than buying something already working? I thought she was defending me. Maybe she was, or maybe she was selling me. Even now, I'm not sure. When I proposed, it was with the same ring my father gave my mother. Claire didn't say yes immediately. She stared at it for a long time, not because it wasn't big enough, but because it meant something she couldn't control. Eventually, she smiled, kissed me, and said, let's do it. We started planning the wedding. Her family offered their estate in upstate New York. My parents offered to pay for the rehearsal dinner. Claire thought that was sweet. That word again, sweet. I started hearing it more often. My mom's dress, sweet. My uncle's speech, sweet. My college friends trying to dance after a few drinks, sweet. She said it like a pat on the head. 3 weeks before the wedding, Claire handed me a manila envelope over brunch. Inside, a prenuptial agreement. 12 pages, clean, sterile, bullet-pointed with the precision of a war plan. Everything she owned before the marriage remained hers. Any appreciation of her investments would remain hers. Any properties purchased, unless explicitly agreed upon, would be hers. Debts, not addressed. I didn't get angry, I didn't argue. I read it twice, asked a few clarifying questions, and nodded. Then the next morning I called someone, an old classmate of mine, Derek, who now worked in financial analytics. I told him I needed a rundown on Whitmore Holdings. Not the company her father owned, not Claire's public profile. I wanted to know what was buried, and he found it. Claire had made a high-risk personal investment the year prior, a tech company run by one of her friends from Yale. Glossy pitch, big promise, but the numbers were tanking. Claire had quietly pumped more money into it, probably trying to salvage her image with her father's circles, and she was leveraged, not catastrophically, but close. She was carrying a personal debt that would swallow most people whole, but not her, because her last name worked as a flotation device. She hadn't told me. The next day I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer, a different kind, one who specialized in contract negotiation and silent clauses. We drafted a revision to Claire's prenup, nothing aggressive, just balanced. In the new version, I agreed to all her asset protections, every single one. But I added one clause. In the event of marriage, all outstanding premarital debts must be disclosed and will be considered joint responsibility to be split equally. I didn't tell her about the change. I sent it back through her family's lawyer. Claire didn't say anything for 2 days. Then she asked me to dinner. That night she looked different, tired, less polished. She brought the folder with her, set it on the table like a live grenade. I waited. You think this is funny? She asked, voice quiet. No, I said, I think it's fair. Isn't that what you wanted? Her hands were shaking. You don't understand how this looks, your father's not marrying me. You are. She stared at me like she didn't recognize the man across the table. Maybe she didn't. Maybe I'd been too quiet, too agreeable. Maybe she forgot I was raised by people who taught me that fairness means sharing both the credit and the burden. Claire didn't walk out. Not that night. But she didn't sign either. We still had time, but the silence that followed said more than any signature could. The silence after I returned the contract wasn't just awkward, it was strategic. Claire was waiting. She assumed, I think, that I'd eventually fold, that I'd crack under the weight of her family's presence, the wedding plans already set in motion, the social momentum behind our engagement. What she didn't understand was this: I'd been living under pressure my whole life, and unlike her, I didn't fear discomfort. I'd been raised in it. The morning after our dinner, after she looked me in the eye and accused me of mocking her with the debt clause, I made myself eggs and coffee like nothing had changed. I could feel her watching me from the doorway. Her silence wasn't cold, it was calculating. She was trying to decide whether I was bluffing, whether this clause was just a flare-up of pride or something deeper. I didn't offer her reassurance. I didn't try to fix it. I simply acted like a man who meant every word he said. She left for work without a word. Days passed like that. Thin words. Long silences. She was distant but not gone. Still checking in about vendors. Still talking about floral arrangements. Still pretending this marriage train hadn't hit a bend in the tracks. But I knew Claire well enough by now to understand that silence, for her, was a tool. She wasn't avoiding the problem. She was waiting for a better position to attack it from. A week later, I got the call I'd been expecting. Her father's assistant asked me to meet him for lunch at a private club uptown. Not exactly neutral ground. When I arrived, Charles Whitmore was already seated at the corner table, a lowball glass sweating next to him. He didn't stand, didn't smile, just gestured to the seat opposite him. Mr. Pierce, he began, voice smooth as scotch. I understand you've made some modifications to the document we prepared. I nodded. I have. He studied me, amused. You do realize how this looks? I do. I also realize how her version looked. He set down his drink, leaned forward. Let me give you a bit of advice, off the record. Power is like water. It flows until it finds the cracks. Don't mistake your current position for leverage. I smiled. And don't mistake your last name for immunity. He didn't like that, but he respected it. I saw it in the flicker of something behind his eyes, recognition maybe that the man sitting across from him wasn't going to beg. I wasn't here to win a fortune. I was here to call a bluff, Claire's bluff. That night, I came home to find her pacing the living room, no makeup, hair tied up, barefoot and frustrated. The contract was on the coffee table, its pages marked and remarked in red ink. You embarrassed me, she said without turning around. No, I replied calmly. I challenged you. She whirled. This was supposed to be simple, Nathan. A formality. Then you shouldn't have handed me a contract that assumed I'd roll over. Her jaw clenched. It's not about rolling over. It's about being smart. About protecting ourselves. Then let's protect both of us, equally. She didn't answer, just stared at me like I'd become someone else overnight. But I hadn't changed. I just stopped pretending. The following week was brutal. The wedding was now 2 weeks away. Her mother was calling every day. Her sister texted passive-aggressive messages like, "You okay? Haven't seen you on Pinterest lately." Claire was unraveling in real time, but trying to maintain composure. I watched her carefully pack away her real emotions behind brunches, calls, fittings. But at night, the space between us grew colder. wider. I remember one particular night I woke up and found her sitting on the couch, staring at her laptop. Financial reports on screen, her face lit only by the pale blue glow of losses. She didn't notice me. She was scared, not of me, not of love, but of losing control, of the image she built for herself, cracking under the weight of vulnerability. I said nothing, just stood there until she looked up. Her expression didn't soften. She closed the laptop and walked past me. 3 days before the wedding, she asked to meet at the venue. It was a sprawling estate, green hills rolling behind it like something out of a movie. The decorations were already half up. White chairs, ivory linens, strings of lights that would glow at dusk. She stood under the arch where we were supposed to say our vows. Her dress wasn't finished yet, but she was wearing white. Symbolic, maybe. I'm not signing it, she said finally. I nodded. Then I won't marry you. She blinked. That's it? I walked toward her slowly. Claire, you're the most brilliant woman I've ever met. But somewhere along the way, you confuse control with love. And I won't spend my life earning what I already gave freely. A long silence. I don't want your money, I said. I want your partnership, but if I have to prove my worth by pretending your burdens don't touch me, then we're not building a marriage. We're staging a performance. She looked away. I turned and left. That night, I packed my bags, and for the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. The morning after I left the venue, I checked into a modest hotel across town. No fanfare, no confrontation, just a quiet exit from the orbit of someone who had built her identity on control. I didn't leave her a note, didn't text, didn't post anything. The only sound I left behind was the echo of my footsteps down the hallway outside our apartment. I spent the first 2 days catching my breath. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when you finally let go of a fight you've been bracing for. I wandered the city like a man who had just survived a hurricane. The world looked the same, but I didn't. I sat in cafes without checking my phone, walked without a destination, thought about everything and nothing, and then the silence broke. It started with a voicemail from my best friend Alex. Hey man, is it true you bailed on the wedding? Her cousin just posted something weird. Then came the news alerts. At first, just whispers on gossip blogs, then full-blown articles in finance media. Whitmore heiress wedding postponed indefinitely. Sources say prenup dispute at heart of Nathan Pierce Claire Whitmore split. Inside the contract clause that derailed a power couple. The media didn't get all the details right, but they got enough. Somewhere along the line, someone leaked the existence of a debt clause. It didn't say how much Claire owed or to whom, but it didn't need to. Speculation did the rest. Claire's name was trending. That's when the calls really started. Reporters, bloggers, talk show producers, even my old college roommate reached out just to say, well, bro, you're kind of famous right now. I ignored it all until I couldn't. Because one morning I opened an email from a major financial magazine. They'd gotten wind of the investment Claire made, the one that buried her. They were planning a feature story on it, and they wanted my comment. I didn't reply, but I knew what was coming. A day later, Claire's mother called me. Her voice was sharper than glass. Do you have any idea what you've done to her? I kept my tone even. No one made her invest that money, and no one forced her to hide it. She was trying to protect herself. So was I. That was the end of that call. But Claire didn't call. Not right away. Instead, she sent me an email. Short, precise. Just like her, I didn't leak it, but I know who did. I'm sorry, I wish things had gone differently. No signature. No ask to come back. Just a line in the sand. I didn't reply. But I read it 5 times. The fallout from the wedding reached her professional life too. The board at her firm called an emergency meeting. Investors were nervous. Clients were asking questions. Claire didn't lose her job, but she took a leave of absence that everyone knew wasn't optional. Meanwhile, I got calls from 3 VC firms. Turns out, standing up to a powerful family makes you interesting in the startup world. One firm even said, anyone who walks away from Whitmore money is someone who knows their worth. I took one of the offers, not out of spite, out of clarity. A month later, I signed the papers to start a new venture, my own team, my own office. I wasn't building for revenge, I was building for me. But still, the ghost of Claire lingered. not in a haunting way, more like a scar that tightens when the weather changes. One afternoon, I saw her by accident or fate. I was walking out of a meeting downtown when I spotted her across the street. She was sitting outside a cafe alone, stirring a coffee she wasn't drinking. Her hair was pulled back, sunglasses on, but I knew that posture, knew the curve of her fingers against the cup. She looked up, saw me, and for a second, neither of us moved. Then she smiled, just barely, a quiet nod. Not a plea, not a bridge, just closure. I didn't walk over, didn't need to, because sometimes walking away is the loudest thing you can do, and sometimes silence is the final word. That night I slept without dreaming, and in the morning I didn't miss her. By the second month, things had quieted down, at least on the surface. The media had moved on to newer scandals, newer couples, newer disasters. But inside certain circles, Claire Whitmore's name still lingered like perfume in an empty elevator. People remembered, not the full story, of course, just the headlines, just the optics. And in her world, optics were everything. I heard from mutual contacts that Claire had moved in with her sister for a while, that she was recalibrating, that she had started seeing a therapist. Her leave of absence stretched into a sabbatical. She wasn't fired, not officially, but her spot at the firm quietly replaced. A new face on the website. Her desk cleared one night after hours. She disappeared from the public eye almost completely. No new posts, no updates, no charity galas or panels or investment forums. She had always been a public figure, not because she sought attention, but because attention always sought her. Now, silence. I thought that would bring me peace, but healing doesn't follow a schedule. There were days when I felt empowered, strong, certain I'd made the right call. Days when I could walk into investor meetings, pitch my company, and feel 10 feet tall. My startup was gaining traction. We signed our first major partnership deal 6 weeks in. I hired 5 people, then 10. We moved into a shared office space in Soho. I felt like I was rebuilding my identity brick by brick, and this time I owned the land it stood on. But then there were nights when I sat on the edge of my new bed and wondered whether love is always a transaction, just waiting to be itemized. Nights when I asked myself, was it pride or principle? Did I walk away because it was right, or because I was scared she'd always hold the cards? I didn't talk about Claire much, not even with Alex. He came by the new office a few times, helped with branding, drank overpriced coffee with me, and asked careful questions. But I kept most of it locked up. One day I found myself rereading her email, the short one, the apology with no signature. It didn't say much, but the way she'd written, I wish things had gone differently. It hit different now, not as regret, but as truth. Maybe she did wish that. Maybe she really didn't leak it. Maybe in another version of our story, we figured it out. But this wasn't that version. In her absence, her world shifted. A few journalists wrote follow-ups, not about the breakup, but about the dangers of conflating personal image with business integrity. Claire had been the golden child, the symbol of polished perfection. Now she was a cautionary tale whispered in corner offices and mentoring sessions. A reminder that even the most curated lives can unravel fast. Meanwhile, I began to meet people who didn't know me through her, investors who had never heard of the Whitmore name, clients who respected my work for its own merit. I even started mentoring younger founders, sharing lessons I'd never expected to have to learn. And in doing so, I reclaimed my voice, not as Claire's ex-fiancé, but as Nathan Pierce, CEO and survivor of emotional warfare wrapped in Chanel. Then out of nowhere came an invitation. It arrived by courier, thick cream cardstock, no return address. Claire Whitmore invites you to a private exhibition, a study in balance. A small art show she was curating, apparently. Her name was printed at the bottom, but in a different font, smaller, subtle. I almost threw it out, but curiosity, it's a powerful drug, so I went. The venue was a converted warehouse, stripped down and flooded with soft amber lighting. There were maybe 20 people there, no photographers, no fanfare. The theme was balance, and the pieces were raw, stark contrasts of texture and space. One sculpture stood out, a metal beam suspended over jagged stone. It looked like it should tip, but it held. Barely. I stood in front of it a long time. Then I felt her behind me. I thought you might come, she said. I turned. She looked different, simpler, hair loose, makeup minimal, a gray dress that didn't try to impress. She looked like someone trying to find her footing, not prove she didn't need one. You did this? I asked. She nodded. Not all of it, but the concept, balance, what we owe each other, what we don't. We stood in silence. For once, it wasn't heavy. It was earned. I never wanted to hurt you, she said. I know. Another pause. Then, if I had signed it, would we still be together? I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know, but because the answer was complicated. No, I said at last. Because if you'd signed it just to keep me, it would have broken us later, quietly. From the inside, she nodded, eyes glassy. Then I guess this was the better break. Maybe the only one that gave us a chance to heal. I left without hugging her, without promising to call. It wasn't that kind of moment, but as I stepped out into the night, I realized something. Letting go isn't always about loss. Sometimes it's the beginning of knowing your worth. And sometimes closure doesn't come in words, but in the silence that follows a truth finally spoken. Life kept moving. I didn't chase it, didn't run from it. I walked beside it, quietly, like an old friend I'd finally stopped trying to impress. 6 months after the exhibition, my startup had tripled in staff. We weren't just gaining traction, we were setting pace. I was in back-to-back meetings most days, juggling negotiations and product launches. But somewhere in that constant motion, I started feeling grounded, like I was no longer building something to prove a point. I was just building. It wasn't about being seen anymore. It was about being whole. People began to notice. I was invited to speak at conferences. I got emails from founders asking for mentorship. Even a well-known podcast reached out, asking if I'd share my journey. I hesitated, not because I didn't have a story, but because I didn't want to become a character in someone else's narrative. But then I remembered something my father used to say. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can offer is the truth that cost you the most. So I said yes. The podcast aired on a Tuesday. By Thursday, my inbox was flooded. Messages from strangers, former classmates, investors. Even a quiet note from someone on Claire's old team. You said the part we all felt but were too scared to admit. Fairness is only real when it includes the ugly parts. I didn't respond to most of them, but I read every one. Somewhere in that flood was an email with no subject line. No signature, just 5 lines. I heard your voice. You sound lighter. I hope you know I meant it. About the mirror, I still keep mine. See, this time I didn't burn it. I archived it, not as a keepsake, but as a quiet record of growth. Around this time, Mia and I had started spending weekends away from the city. Just us, the mountains, and a cabin she had access to through a family friend. We'd make breakfast together, read by the fireplace, talk late into the night about things we never rushed. There was no performance, no pretense, just space, real, breathing space to be human together. One morning I told her the full story. Not the headlines, the real one, the feeling of being groomed into someone else's life. The contract, the clause, the silence, the walk away. When I finished, she didn't look at me like I was broken. She looked at me like I was rebuilt. Would you ever speak to her again? She asked softly. I paused, then shook my head. Not because I hate her, but because I finally learned that not everything unfinished needs to be reopened. Some stories close best in silence. She nodded. Then kissed me like that was enough. A year after the breakup, I was nominated for a business award I didn't even know existed. It was for transformative leadership through adversity. I almost skipped the ceremony. But Mia convinced me to go. When they called my name, I walked up slowly, not out of hesitation, but out of reverence. For the journey, for the battle, for the boy who once stood under fairy lights proposing with a ring from his father, not knowing he was already signing up for war. As I looked out into the room, I didn't see Claire, but I saw every version of myself I'd fought to become. I saw my mom's hands after double shifts, my dad's quiet nods of approval, and all the days I thought I wasn't enough. When they handed me the mic, I didn't talk about business. I talked about debt. Not the financial kind, the kind you carry in your bones, the kind that comes from making yourself small to fit into someone else's blueprint. I once thought fairness meant avoiding conflict, I said. Now I know. It means standing tall when it would be easier to bow. Applause echoed, but I barely heard it. Because the real reward wasn't the trophy. It was the peace that followed, the knowledge that I'd made it through without folding, that I'd stood my ground when it would have been easier to sign and smile, that I'd chosen myself. I'm Nathan Pierce, and I don't just not regret it, I'm proud of it.